Our brains work the best when they're in these ideal environments, when it's a certain temperature, because our brains function through proteins, and proteins the nature when it's really hot. So I realized climate change through heat and through extreme weather events such as wildfires or floods could have the potential to impact the neurology and the mental health of individuals.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of Sustainable Master Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm talking to the ecosystem of sustainability professionals from the corporate, government, academic, innovation spaces about their work they're doing to solve the challenges that we face. For me, it's all about inspiring and equipping the next generation of ambassadors. And so with this episode, I'm extremely excited to be joined by Burçin Ikiz, who is a neuroscientist and global health advisor exploring how climate change and ecological crises impact brain health. And she's really focused on understanding how the environmental controls affect brains and also how these insights can be translated into tangible global health solutions. Burcin, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. It's really great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so as a starting point, I always like to ask this question: who are you and what is the work that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Well, you gave me a perfect introduction. I am a neuroscientist. For the last 20 years. I have been studying brain health, and I started my career looking into neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's. And throughout my career, looked into rare neurological disorders, serious mental illness such as bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And through these processes, kind of got frustrated with the field of neuroscience in the ways we explore and try to understand brain health. We were always so focused what's happening inside our brains, what's happening with our neurons, without realizing that our brains are connected to our bodies are connected to the environment we live in, whether it's the social environment, natural environment, built environment. And all of these help shape our brains. And so I started really kind of expanding my view of what brain health is and started looking into environmental factors that affect our brain health. And then about 3, 4 years ago, having really young kids, and my oldest one was a kindergarten at the time, he started questioning about what climate change is, and we started having conversations. And he loved nature, he loved animals. And in my responses to his questions about what climate change is, what it may be doing to our planet and his beloved animals, that really upset him, and it made me also realize what a serious crisis this is, especially for the future of our children. And I wanted to be part of the climate action, and I thought to myself, well, how can I most meaningfully contribute? And I said, I study the brain. Let me see how we know what we know about how climate change impacts our brains. And I couldn't find any information at the time. So that kind of led me into this journey of getting out of my field of neuroscience and finding more scientists and clinicians and designers and policymakers and public health professionals working in this space, looking at one aspect of brain health, whether it's green spaces and mental health, or whether it's air pollution and children's brain development. And in talking to more people, I realized we had to come together and learn from each other because everybody was working in isolation. And with that, I formed about 1.5 years ago this international global action tank called Neuroclimate Working Group. And we've been working on anywhere from research and expanding knowledge in this space to, like we said, tangible solutions and putting knowledge into action, into policy and community work in trying to address these impacts.
Okay, so I'm going to back it up. I'm going to chop it up a little bit. So through your research, was there what was the moment or insight that made you kind of come to look at climate change as a neurological mental health issue, not just as, say, an environmental one?
Yes, it was in realizing, our brains work the best when they're in these ideal environments, when it's a certain temperature, because, our brains function through proteins, and proteins the nature when it's really hot. And it could be any other stressors that happen to the body, it gets carried to our brains as well. And a lot of the studies I was doing, anywhere from looking at how certain environmental toxins may be affecting our brains. I realize climate change through heat and through extreme weather events such as wildfires or floods and hurricanes are actually could have the potential to impact the neurology and the mental health of individuals. When I say brain health, we combine neurological health, mental health, cognition, memory, neurodevelopment, neurodegeneration, anything that pertains to the brains, they all get impacted by the environment we're in. So if it's hot, our body sees it as a stress response. Our brains see it as a stress response. If there's wildfires happening due to that's then air pollution and the pollutants in the air and the emotional trauma on having gone through a disaster like that, all of them affect our brains. And so that's when I realized we really have to study and understand and these impacts better to be able to address them.
So if I were to peel that a little bit, like you mentioned stress a couple times. Is it the physical stress of the heat on the brain that's the problem, or is it the psychological? Because I mean, if we're talking about forest fires and drought and all these things, like I can imagine all those situations, people get stressed out and that impacts your brain for sure, like how you function, right? But is it that is the major issue, or is it actually the heat, the drought, the smog, the whatever, like that has a physical, separate from your stress response impact to your brain?
Both. It's physical and psychological. There's physical, so when the heat happens and the temperatures rise, the stress responses, meaning the oxid. So even biologically within the brain, the cells started going oxidative stress and start being inflamed, and their communication with each other get disrupted. So this is a very physical thing, and we see the health outcomes of people having cognitive decline, increased risk for stroke, or just having memory problems. If they have an existing neurological condition or psychiatric condition, we see the worsening of symptoms because it's just, for example, the medicines they take, they just don't work. If someone has epilepsy, they have higher incidences of having seizures when it's an extreme heat event happening. Same with psychiatric disorders and having episodes of psychosis or suicide increases during the heat. But there's also the psychological element to it as well. Our emotional regulation gets disrupted. It's just again the same way the way the neurons communicate with each other during the heat gets disrupted. But with the other extreme, and also when extreme heat events happen, for a lot of people that are used to, for example, perhaps going outside and enjoying being outdoors or being socializing, being outdoors, that element goes away. You have to stay inside to be protected. And that can have elements of social isolation, disruption of their routines, which can really produce a lot of psychological stress on young people or the aging population as well.
How how do we measure this? Because I keep thinking like if we're talking about climate change and environmental, say, degradation or like on a long term, I feel like that's almost impossible or intangible to measure because there's just so many different factors. But then like an event, it's like, yeah, the smog lasted for 1 week and we saw these many hospital visits that is an increase from the average. Like, how do you as a scientist maybe approach this? And can you use events as a way to layer up to the trend, or is that where the science gets a bit shaky?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's definitely, there's a difference between epidemiological, more population-wide studies versus more mechanistic studies. We're trying to understand really what's happening in the brain as these are happening. And both of them have their limitations. With epidemiological studies, we can really pinpoint to certain events. Like you said, a wildfire happened, the campfire happened in California. And let's go see if there was increased populations of people with dementia or with stroke or so on. That's something you can really measure and understand. But every event actually can be so in isolation are so different from another. Even just wildfires, if we're speaking an urban. So I was in Los Angeles last January where we had these really horrific wildfires. And what was different about these fires versus something that happened in a forest area being burned down was was a very urban wildfire. So the things that were in the air was not just carbon and the PM 2.5 the materials you would normally see, but it was actually also lead. It was asbestos. It was all these things that come from the construction of the buildings or the lead from the batteries and so on were also in the air, was also in the water and the soil. We actually tested my son's preschool's sandbox because we were so close to the fires and we had to evacuate for it. We found all kinds of heavy metals. So you see a whole different. So to be able to really study that in a lab environment, it's extremely difficult. You can do it in a very controlled way, but in reality, we are seeing during these events, it's not just the air pollutants, it's also the heat, it's also the emotional trauma, which is really hard to measure in a lab setting. And so all of them happening at the same time. And the science so far has been very limited in its way of being able to understand when these factors jointly how harmful they are to our brains, to our bodies, and the trend is going to get worse, right? And there will be long-term air pollution exposures, long-term repeated heat exposures, more frequent emotional traumas happening. People will be having wildfires. I was just talking to some colleagues in Australia. They were seeing there are certain regions that it just either one alternating wildfire floods they see. So we'll be seeing these increased disasters happening. We don't have a way of studying them yet, but we can only estimate how bad it will be, and we have to still understand these joint factors happening in the long term and in repeated ways.
If we were just to focus on, say, extreme heat, in Southeast Asia, I'm seeing on average temperatures 2, 4, 6 degrees higher, depending on the time of year and depending on where I am. So the overall kind of kettle is getting hotter, but then you have extreme heat events. I think that that's something you can study in a lab, like heat brain impacts. Can you talk a little about what you guys find in the lab about just the impact of heat physically or physiologically on the brain? And then maybe we can talk from there, like what that means.
Yes, absolutely. So, yes, heat probably is one of the areas we have the most knowledge on, and being able to really study in a lab environment, like you said. And even anything above 32 to 35 degrees Celsius, we can see having significant effects on the cognition, in the memory, in the executive functioning of the brain. Again, is results from the stress response that happens in the brain and between the communication between the neurons, the synaptic wiring being impaired, and that causes anywhere from increased events of increased risk for stroke and progression of or symptoms of dementia, Parkinson's disease, and so other health outcomes. A lot more we see increases in not being able to regulate yourself emotionally, or being able to not, decision making process goes down. So we see all kinds of behavioral issues in a lot of people that are even short periods of time that they have exposure to these high levels. And of course, when it's a long sustained period of time, the brain goes into a little bit of adaptation, but it's still not to the level to be able to make up for all the harm that is done.
Okay, so like some of the things you mentioned were kind of longer term, like Parkinson's, dementia, long term. Like in the short term, like let's say you're a factory worker or you're a construction worker, you're outside, it's 38 degrees. Even if you're well, like, is it a matter of hydration or is it just it doesn't matter? Like your brain is cooking. And like what does the body go through when that's happening? Like it's 38 degrees. Like I've seen marathoners running. So is it that bad on a short term, like a few hours, or actually a few hours is really all it takes?
These can be, if it's really just very short period, you're talking about just 2, 3 hours, just as if you go into a sauna and then you come back and everything is cool, perhaps you won't have as drastic damage to your brain. But in reality, all these outside workers, they're out there every day, right? And being under these for long periods of time under the heat. And some of the things we're finding that's really disruptive also is the nighttime temperatures. When the nighttime, it doesn't really substantially cool down, that affects sleep, which also affects cognition and memory and learning, especially in children and adolescents. That affects their mental health. We see a lot more cases of depression, anxiety, even suicide risk, and so on, and psychosis in when the body just cannot cool down and people are exposed to long term. So even just a couple days of extreme heat can cause higher incidence hospitalizations due to epilepsy, due to multiple sclerosis episodes kicking in, due to a lot of psychiatric disorder symptoms worsening and dementia symptoms worsening. So all of a sudden they see a very big drop in their cognitive abilities. People, we know judges, their decision-making process completely gets out of the door for that period, like couple days of period.
Is it a compounding factor that you're more worried about when it comes to heat? Like it causes other things that then are the actual problem, or do you view it as the problem to be solved for?
It's both. I think the heat is just by itself is a problem for our bodies and for our brain. Again, because if it was just literally 2 days a year and that's it, maybe we'll be fine. Just those 2 days, maybe don't have really important exams or really important meetings that day, but you'll be fine. But in reality, a lot of people, what they're facing is these long periods of time that's also getting worse and worse. So what we're going to be seeing is that this compounding effects that you're mentioning.
And then you mentioned that you were talking with people in Melbourne or in Australia about this cycle. Like, who do you talk to about this research, and who is turning on to it as being, say, something of importance that they need to understand better, and why? Like, what's driving them to this conversation now?
So our team, our group is global group. We have about 300 members from 52 different countries. So I talk to a lot of colleagues, and these again, anywhere from city officials and local government policymakers to researchers or clinicians or patient groups. And we talk a lot about, and it can be in different geographies have different, climate change means different. We are all suffering from climate change, but how we see it is different. Where I am in California, it's more about the drought and the wildfires, perhaps. But when we talk about, we'll talk about Malaysia, it's the sea level rises and more the heat and the vector-borne diseases. We see all different, so, but we are all seeing worsening of these conditions, and they all have different harms that are done to our brains. And I think what's being understood right now is among even the more policy makers and local governments, they are realizing they're going through a lot more these disasters, climate-related disasters. They are getting concerned about the increase in hospitalizations and the toll on the healthcare systems as these extreme heat waves are happening, or the air pollution is getting. We are talking a lot with a lot of city officials around the air quality. Can we showing how clean air could be so beneficial for the mental health and neurological health of people. We were part of this global report called State of Global Air. This year, for the first time ever, this report included brain health, and we found that 1 out of 4 dementia deaths are attributable to air pollution. And that's 626,000 deaths that are attributable to air pollution alone from dementia. So we try to really make these points across, again, to try to turn knowledge into action. How can we talk? How can we represent this? And also talking with communities, vulnerable communities. How can we make them more resilient and protect their preventative and prepare them for anywhere from disasters to extreme heat events? That's kind of the things we try to do.
Now, when it comes to, I guess, the recommendations you're making or the context of the conversation, like dementia and, you know, air quality, 1 in 4, there's a direct link. Like, do you go in behind that and like, do you confuse the message if you use heat at all? Or do you have to say, okay, now we also have 1/8 is also heat on top of that. So you should solve for both. Like, I'm curious, like how you focus people at this time, because right now is a difficult time to get action on any of these issues. And you see a lot of regulations at best holding, sometimes rolling back. And so I'm curious, like, while we're talking about extreme heat, you just mentioned like smog and a direct link to dementia deaths that's, very high. Do you find you should leave heat aside for the moment and just focus on smog and air pollution? Because at least that people, they understand it's a very local thing, it's something that they can control. Or do you try and expand the conversation and be like, and heat?
I try to expand the conversation as much as possible to directly to climate change related factors, whether it's heat or disaster preparedness that we have to talk about. But it depends on the conversation too. Sometimes, especially with certain state delegates and so on, when we talk with the politicians and policy people, sometimes they are looking for a very direct messaging that they want to take to their governments. But I think it's all what I try to give the message is they're all really related to each other and interconnected. Climate change and air pollution are interconnected with each other. They kind of like vicious cycle that worsens one another. And if we're trying to act on and they have both of them acting on both of them have huge co-benefits to our health, population health, public health, human health, brain health. So that's the kind of message I try to get. If you're talking about the air pollution and then making public transport in the city levels, let's say, making public transport more available, making more green spaces. These are not just good for only for air pollution, but it's also good for climate action. It's having green spaces make sure that the temperatures don't go as high, so they can have lower temperature. They are really great for people to go out there, physically exercise, have cleaner air, have more social interactions, which is really great for mental health and physical health and in general, and brain health as well. So those are the kind of messages we try to give. Like the action is we're not looking into developing this cool new technology. It's actually really simple solutions that we can get that has a huge co-benefits.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, what are the interventions that you see kind of be it clinical, community-based, policy level that are showing promise right now that people are willing to put time into, put money into, put the resources that are showing like they get it and now it's time to take action.
A lot of it is still around raising awareness about this. Even when we talk about air pollution and so on, people still think about, oh, the lungs, or maybe at most maybe their heart, but people don't think about the brain. So a lot of what we try to do is also raise awareness and educate people, including healthcare professionals. So we have some partnerships with World Health Organization, for example, where we're creating these training modules on the impacts of climate change and air pollution on brain health, so that people, healthcare professionals anywhere know that when there's extreme heat happening, perhaps we should have a neurologist on call as well, because there may be increased cases coming into the hospital. Or if they have certain patients, let's say with epilepsy or MS, maybe we should warn them. But the kind of actions we see is a lot around disaster preparedness, and so we try to come up with actually these brain vulnerability index and a tool to help local governments be able to map individuals and the populations most at risk, so they can be better prepare and prevent the damage happening. So those are kind of the actions we try to take.
When you say prepare and prevent, how much of what you're focusing on is on, say, mitigation? Like if you take these actions, you can reduce smog. Here's why you should do it, versus how much of this is resilience? Like you're going to have this problem. You clearly don't have a handle on it. Here's the tsunami coming, and here's what you can do.
I'm still relatively new to the climate change field, and one of the things that had surprised me a lot was this segregation between mitigation, adaptation, or resilience. And I thought, we have to act on both. Mitigation obviously is very critical, and a lot of focus, anywhere from funding focus to attention, is given to mitigation, which is really important, especially when it comes to air pollution and so on. We know that the policies work and can get air cleaner and so on. But I think what we have to also realize is this is happening. We're seeing the effects of the climate crisis every day in our lives. I mean, this year alone, I had two incidences, both in my home country, Turkey. Our summer house got burned down by the wildfires during the summer. And over the last January, as I mentioned, we had to evacuate because our home almost burned down in Los Angeles. We were talking about two very different places. Same kind, and so all of a sudden it felt very personal, the crisis and its effects on me and my family. And so what we're realizing is it's not just me. Going to be seeing, this is going to be everybody's personal history very soon. And so we have to, while working on mitigation, we cannot ignore resilience building and adaptation. How can we, and I think that's the part I would like to focus more on. How can we come up with, explore and find these resilience factors, whether at individual levels or population levels, and learning from even indigenous communities around the world. How do they adapt to the heat? What do they do when the disaster strikes? And so that we can really share it with the different vulnerable communities around the world.
Speaking of like sharing with around the world, like you've worked with WHO, Council on Foreign Relations, you've worked with U.S. foreign policy on global health. Like, what is it that brings you to that work? And like, what are you trying to either contribute or what are you trying to learn through those different bodies and those different platforms? Because that's not something that an individual does. Like there's so many actors contributing. So why are you getting involved with that? What are you contributing and what are you getting out of it?
I spent my good 15 years of my career in a lab, completely isolated from people. So it's all of a sudden being in these a lot of spaces and meeting people from all around the world it's thrilling. If anything, I'm learning more than anybody else in these conversations. And I love that. But I feel like it's also the responsibility as a scientist, as someone who is finding evidence and so on, to be able to share and have these different conversations in different languages. And by I mean, I have to speak a little bit of economy. I have to speak a little bit of policy. Like I'm learning all those languages too as we go, and because we have to. They do trust. There's still, although in the United States, it's changing a little bit, the trust to scientists, but there's a certain responsibility. I feel like as we're learning these things, we have to share and we have to be part of the action and we have to speak these languages and it's really important to be able to act. They are looking for evidence, and we do have the evidence, so we have to bring it. But we have to also talk about what I try to say, and sometimes we have to talk about one of the things we're trying to do, this cost of inaction report, like because saying if we don't do anything we're going to have this many number of people with dementia by this time, and this is going to have trillions of dollars of cost to you because we have to speak that language. But for me, it's also important to bring the human side of it, health side of it, especially when we talk to people who may or not believe climate change is just as big of a problem, or if climate change even exists. But when you talk about health and brain health, especially that's happening to children or the aging population, people have parents that are suffering from neurodegenerative disease. People have children that they're worried about for their neurodevelopment. So they can understand that that could be a common denominator connecting us all. And that's really something I try to lean on in my conversations with whether it's policymakers or local governments or just everyday life with other different people.
All right, you mentioned kind of trust and science and scientists and the need to prove it. Kind of a question for you, which is, I mean, there's always people who are pushing back on climate change. One, is it real? Then it moved to, are we the ones who are doing it? Now it's moving to, is there anything to be done? COVID, I think, was a great example of how even when you have and that's the intangible, right? Like, that's the thing that's coming 30 years away, 50 years away, world ending or sinking islands. Like, for someone who's sitting in, say, San Francisco or in LA, hasn't necessarily been the most direct thing. And so the science didn't necessarily have like a direct application they could see right in their face. And so mistrust or questions or debate, I mean, there was a space for that I felt was like, this is just obvious. And the question is like, do you want to give space to it, give space to those people, or do you want to focus on those who get it, you can work with, and actually are influential, right? COVID for me was an unwinding even of that theory, which is you have something which potentially, whether it's direct or through comorbidity or through the hospitals being stocked full of people because they're overwhelmed, it can literally wipe out a family member, someone who's close to you, if not yourself. Should you choose not to take certain actions, right? Like, and we could talk like, is the face mask effective, or is it the right combo of drugs, or is it 6 feet away? Like, whatever. Like, people just didn't even acknowledge that a disease could have that impact on you. And I'm curious, like, as a science, like, what did you take away from that time about science, trust, and then engagement? Because for me, I feel like if as a sustainability professional, we didn't look at that time and go, we have to radically kind of change how we engage people, like we missed something, a huge message through COVID. And again, like, I'm not here to debate that these people are or are not intelligent, caring, whatever. Like, I'm not here to judge the person. I'm focused on like, what's the process as scientists, as communicators that maybe you took away from that time, like two or three things like, oh my God, this is not working. I should think about.
That's a great question, very deep one. And I certainly don't have a set answer, but yeah, I would say, yeah, COVID time was a really great learning process in many ways, in that ways of how to communicate science. And one of the most shocking thing to me during that time was I had family members living in Turkey. And I had where I'm from, where I was born and raised. I had family members living in Netherlands. I had family members living in India, and I had family members living, or us living in Los Angeles at the time. And everybody had very different ways of dealing with it. In Netherlands, they were like, no mask, just go out and it's fine. We just, immune system, it will figure it out. And in India and other parts of Asia, everybody it was a lot more about, okay, we have to protect each other. It was about the community. It was about wearing the mask. And in the US, it became again a political thing, which we see a lot happening in like with climate change. It becomes and I see that with bringing climate change to the topics of with conversations I have around the world. It is almost a cultural thing that we have to realize. It's a for some in the US, it's a political thing. We have to discuss whether it exists or not. But when I talk to colleagues in Southeast Asia or in South America, they're like, they know climate change exists. They see it every day in their lives, and they want to act on it for each other. There's that sense of collectiveness that's part of this. So, but for them, it's more about, yeah, but also, there's the element of more poverty, like that comes with other problems that comes with global south. So it's about how to prioritize that and how to make them realize that climate action is connected to poverty and all the other things that are political disarray and violence that is happening. They're all interconnected as well. Versus it's about how can we communicate the humanness of this problem, I think. And it's, of course, it's not just humanness. It affects the ecology, it affects the animals, but why we should care and why we should act on it has a very human element. And in respecting the different cultures, in respecting the kind of modified conversation you're having to make people understand and touch them. And I feel like health does a great way of doing that, because we all care about the health of we all love our people, and we all care about our people, whether it's a whole entire community that they live in or versus it's just your wife, your son, it's we are social human beings. We do care. So it's about how to make that connection.
Yeah, I mean, I'm being honest, I struggle with that one because I feel like the morality of like, or the moral framework of that has just been problematic. And I haven't seen where it works consistently for a long time. Like on an issue like, say, air pollution, I need to protect my young children and my aging parents. And if I'm asthmatic or I'm a runner, I need to protect myself, right? Like, but at like the sociological level, like at society level, maintaining that for a long time, I found like it's very tough. And if you make this like if you don't support, you're complicit kind of argument, like we've seen with so many issues in the last 2, 3 years, I actually feel like that approach undermined the ability to actually talk with people. So I'm like, I don't know the right path. And I'm like, if the moral thing doesn't work and data doesn't work, what does? And I'm curious, like, when you're talking when you're at WHO and CFR and these other organizations, like, are they having these conversations about how to adjust? And does anyone have any new ideas, or is it just, like people just kind of hope that things change and they go back to 2019 when we all believed in science?
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer. I would say one of the things we had, one of the concerns I have with climate change and its impacts on mental health is the young people and the eco anxiety, the climate anxiety, the grief. It's actually a whole wheel of emotions that is coming around that. And more we know from the studies that are done over 10 countries or so, is that about 60-70% of young people feel very anxious about climate change, and they feel very concerned about their future. It affects their day-to-day lives. It affects their big life decisions, what profession to choose or whether to have children or not. And young people, children, they are 100% of our future. And one of the things we have done in one study was looking at we did some MRI images, brain images. This was done by my colleague Josh Carlson in the University of North in Michigan, and he was able to find a specific place in our brains that gets activated by climate anxiety that's different from generalized anxiety disorder, because so it has its own special place in the brain. It's a very rational response. Young people are feeling, even if they're directly not affected, they have social media, they hear the news, we see images of floods and wildfires, house burning, children crying, and we're empathetic individuals. Our brains work very empathetically with the mirror neurons and so on. So you feel it's real, and people and young people are feeling very nervous. And one of the things we looked at was what works, what makes that area of the brain becomes more deactivated and make people feel better. Um, and that was pro-environment behavior and collective action. Young people are looking into being part of the action. They want their actions to matter. They want to have agency of change. And because they feel mad and furious, understandably so and rightfully so, that this was not their crisis, they didn't get, so they didn't do anything to contribute to it, but it's their problem. And so when I think about that, I think I actually get a lot of hope that, like, yes, collective action, and we're going to get it one way or other, whether it's through, if it's not through the big political things, the young people will bring the movement in, and that's how it's supposed to be too.
Yeah, I basically I'm so happy that the education system up until your first 18 years did such a good job to make you aware of all these issues, but it pisses me off that all they did was leave you with anxiety. Like they have no tool sets. And it's not just climate change, it's the future of jobs. It is, social inequity, it is social value. It's every issue that the world faces. And they just feel like they're being overwhelmed by all these things happening at once. And that's like stopping their brain from moving forward. And so, I mean, I enjoy teaching because I just tell them, like, yeah, this is all true, but now let's spend time figuring like what you can focus on and how to look at a system and how to get engaged. And like, okay, some of you are gonna be activists, you can be out there, saving the whales, and other, you're just gonna be a mom. And you're just gonna try, like, here are the tool sets. And I find that actually by teaching just tool set mindset, for action, right? No matter you want to be a corporate person, you want to be an academic, you be a non, it doesn't matter. Like, and I tell them, like, I don't care what you want to do, but like, here's how you actually break this stuff down. They're just like, this calm comes over them, and they shut off their screens and they lean in because they haven't had anyone tell them like how to do something. It's just, here's what the world is, and good luck. And they're just, but I kind of wonder, like, how do we fix that, like at the policy level? Because you have governments and you have all these activists who are like, okay, we're going to 4 degrees, 6 degrees. Like, is the answer better policy, or is the answer better tool sets for the populace? In a sense, like, we put out a guide for on a hot day, go sit underneath a tree, have a cold drink, go to a library which has the air conditioning. Like, is that better, or is it actually like better policy that's focused on climate change resilience?
If you have limited resources, you have to choose one. I would say both, but and I agree with you. I think we have to have these toolkits, these things you can do given to young people, because otherwise, yeah, it's just desperation. There's nothing I can do, right? And then just give up, and we definitely don't want that to happen. And I think there's a lot you can do at individual levels, and but there's a lot to be done at the policy levels and the population levels too, because that's also a great way to really impact, especially reach, because it's such a equity issue. Climate comes with it. And to be able to really reach the most vulnerable populations, you have to have some systemic policy changes as well.
When you're talking to policymakers, when you're trying to influence policy, who's the most receptive right now? Like, within, say, is it say global South governments, or is it city governments, or is it a specific department within the government? Like, do you find like there's different engagement by different people? And generally speaking, are there characteristics to them that make them more open? Like, it's because they're actually managing the hospital network, or they're actually on in charge of cleaning up air. Like, who in general speaking, like which part of the policymakers are most interested in, like, are there some common factors behind that interest?
I definitely see it a lot more in local governments and city officials wise because they feel it. They do see that the ones that have the most access to communities that have that communication with people are the ones that are most receptive to it. But that also includes healthcare professionals. When even if a healthcare professional that is not trained, and this is some of the things we're trying to create also is training materials and curriculums to train healthcare professionals around climate change's impacts on health. And there's some really great organizations around the world that is working on that. And when we start explaining them, they say, yes, yes, I see that actually all the time. And but also it's about the city officials that see, especially when a disaster strikes. I mean, we were talking to officials in LA after the wildfire and or the schools and so on. Yes, then when people actually see those effects directly in their own fields, then they care and they're most receptive to change. Not It's harder to get to more state level, going to certain ministries because it's that becomes a much harder conversation.
What are a few things that you wish that health leaders, policymakers, climate negotiators understood about heat, mental health, to help them improve their current playbook or to help them properly understand the context for the playbooks that they're creating?
Yeah, so I would say two things that the climate adaptation and environmental policies have to have brain health and mental health in mind in their actions, and whether it's a disaster preparedness or prevention, or but it has to be also there are certain government officials that are working, for example, in Chile is starting with this amazing dementia plan and so on, but they have nothing around environment and climate. And so what we try to do is these dual conversations, talk with the people that care about the diseases and health, talk to them about how climate and environment impact in that. And then we try to talk with the officials that have more policy things on climate action and so on. We try to tell them about the brain health. And so there has to be on the common conversations happening on both, and people really understand when they talk about climate change that mental health and brain health is a big part of it.
So, as a last question, looking ahead, what gives you hope? Like, are there emerging ideas, innovations, shift that give you optimism about addressing the mental health dimensions of climate change, heat, and other events?
So we formed this neuroclimate working group about 1.5 years ago, and I encourage anyone to check it out and reach out if they're interested in joining. And that has been the most impactful and meaningful work I feel like I've ever done. I feel like this is my life's work. And because all the people I meet, whether they're systems designers in Australia or the only psychiatrist from the country of Djibouti or the Brain Health Institute in Latin America, there's so much enthusiasm, so much understanding in this space that is really coming. We just launched our youth council, and so we have a whole amazing group of young people coming into this field, and it's the most generous, kind, sharing, collaborative people with one mission in mind. So that gives me a lot of hope, and I receive, whoever the different people I talk to from different policy levels to academic universities and so on, people are understanding the importance of this work, and I just hope that that will turn into actual sustainable action, and that's what we try to do.